Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep Series 9 and Week 69 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, last week we began our look at Letter 212, which was itself a draft continuation of the amazing Letter 211 that we'd spent 3 weeks on. Today we're going to finish off this pair of letters, really one long letter, I suppose, to Rona Bear. Now, after that powerful reminder that longevity or counterfeit immortality is the chief bait of Sauron, Tolkien moves on to a very different spin on the elves and long life. Almost 20 years before this story would be published in the Silmarillion, he writes, "In the elvish legends, there is record of a strange case of an elf, Míriel, mother of Fëanor, that tried to die, which had disastrous results, leading to the fall of the High Elves. The elves were not subject to disease, but they could be slain. That is, their bodies could be destroyed or mutilated so as to be unfit to sustain life. But this did not lead naturally to death. They were rehabilitated and reborn, and eventually recovered memory of all their past. They remained identical. But Míriel wished to abandon being and refused rebirth." Now, there is a lot there, but we're going to cover the story of Míriel on a Silmarillion Saturday sometime. I will add there is a lengthy footnote that adds, "It was also the elvish and uncorrupted Númenorian view that a good man would or should die voluntarily by surrender with trust before being compelled, as did Aragorn. This may have been the nature of unfallen man," Tolkien says, "though compulsion would not threaten him. He would desire and ask to be allowed to go on to a higher state." He then gets into some fairly deep Catholic theology about the Assumption of Mary, but that might be a bit too deep for today and for me. After all, as we continue with Letter 212, Tolkien gets theological enough already. He works to draw a distinction between his own mythology and what he says may be perhaps called Christian mythology. He explains that in the Christian myth, the fall of man is subsequent to and a consequence of, though not a necessary consequence, the fall of the angels, a rebellion of created free will at a higher level than man. But it is not clearly held, and in many versions is not held at all, that this affected the world in its nature. Evil was brought in from outside by Satan. Okay, Tolkien, so the fall of the angels comes first. That fall does not in and of itself impact the nature of the world. The fall of man happens after that, and as a consequence, though not, as he says, a necessary one. That is, created free will could have chosen otherwise. Then he goes on to make the distinction with his own mythology. The rebellion of created free will precedes creation of the world, Ea, and Ea has in it, subcreatively introduced, evil, rebellions, discordant elements of its own nature already when the let it be was spoken. The fall or corruption, therefore, of all things in it and all inhabitants of it was a possibility, if not inevitable. And that's fascinating. Remember, Melkor's rebellion, what Tolkien says here is a rebellion of created free will, took place during the music, but before the actual creation, before Ilúvatar spoke existence into being with Ea. And that means that every single part of the creation, every molecule is tainted in some way. And Tolkien gives us examples. Trees may go bad, as in the Old Forest. Elves may turn into orcs, and if this required the special perversive malice of Morgoth, still elves themselves could do evil deeds. Even the good Valar, as inhabiting the world, could at least err, as the great Valar did in their dealings with the elves, or as the lesser of their kind, as the Istari or wizards, could in various ways become self-seeking. Of course, those are examples that we see throughout the Legendarium, from the earliest days of the First Age all the way through to the War of the Ring. But then Tolkien steps aside from this laundry list of screw-ups and does a deep dive into one particular poor choice, that of Aulë, the Vala who created the Dwarves. Now again, Tolkien writing a preview of the Silmarillion 20 years before it was published, explaining that, in a sense, Aulë had a fall of his own. He so desired to see the children that he became impatient and tried to anticipate the will of the Creator. Being the greatest of all craftsmen, he tried to make children according to his imperfect knowledge of their kind. Then, in an interesting aside that's not mentioned in the published Silmarillion, he says that Eru confronted him after he'd made 13, one the eldest alone, and 6 more with 6 mates. At that point, Tolkien explains, God spoke to him in anger, but not without pity, for Aulë had done this thing not out of evil desire to have slaves and subjects of his own, but out of impatient love, desiring children to talk to and teach, sharing with them the praise of Ilúvatar and his great love of the materials of which the world is made. And that's a huge difference between Aulë and Melkor. Tolkien goes on, shining a light on the nature of life and sentience. Aulë could not give independent life to his makings. He had only one life, his own, derived from the One, and could at most only distribute it. Behold, said the One, these creatures of thine have only thy will and thy movement. Though you have devised a language for them, they can only report to thee thine own thought. This is a mockery of me. Ooh, look out. That's not good, Aulë. Not good at all when he says it's a mockery of me. But as we know from the published story, Aulë humbled himself and asked for pardon. And then, in a slightly different version from the one that we read in the Silmarillion, Tolkien writes that Aulë took a great hammer, raising it to smite the eldest of his images. But it flinched and cowered from him. And as he withheld his stroke, astonished, he heard the laughter of Ilúvatar. I love that. The laughter of Ilúvatar. What a wonderful thing to include in this. Do you wonder at this? He said. Behold, thy creatures now live, free from thy will. For I have seen thy humility, and taken pity on your impatience. Thy making I have taken up into my design. Now, interestingly, Tolkien explains in the letter that this is the elvish legend of the making of the dwarves, and so the elves have something else to add. The elves report that Ilúvatar said thus also, Nonetheless I will not suffer my design to be forestalled. Thy children shall not awake before mine own. And he commanded Aulë to lay the fathers of the dwarves severally in deep places, each with his mate, save Durin the eldest, who had none. There they should sleep long, until Ilúvatar bade them awake. Now, from there, the letter concludes with what you might be familiar with from the chapter on Aulë and Yavanna in the Silmarillion. Nonetheless, there has been, for the most part, little love between the dwarves and the children of Ilúvatar, and of the fate that Ilúvatar has set upon the children of Aulë beyond the circles of the world, elves and men know nothing, and if dwarves know, they do not speak of it. And then, this being an abandoned draft, the letter just ends right here. And so, for now, this wraps up this week's Tolkien Tuesday. But be sure to join me again next week when we look at a new letter in this revised and updated edition that Tolkien wrote to his cousin. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what I talk about. You also can support the show, get an ad-free feed, and a bonus episode every week. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, this is past future Alan coming back to make a change to the episode. Those of you on video can tell from the mismatched clothing. You may have seen or heard the exciting news last week that soon, but not quite yet, the Prancing Pony podcast will be back on YouTube as I begin a new project. Now, the announcement for that new project should be out soon. In the meantime, since I'm going to be combining all of the PPP content into one YouTube channel, I want to consolidate social media as well. So please be sure you're following at Prancing Pony Pod on Twitter or X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. And then, of course, on Facebook, we're still at the Prancing Pony Podcast. Now, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.